At this time, I would like to ask Mackenzie Phillips to sing our national anthem. Mackenzie Phillips is a 60-year-old Christian singer-songwriter with 7 original singles and has appeared on the Grammy ballot 3 times. She leads worship for student ministry at the Woodlands Church and teaches at the Sarah Kelly Music School. Please welcome Mackenzie.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed, nether twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, nor the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Next, we will have our Fire Chief, Robert Hudson, address you. Chief Hudson started with our fire department in April of 2009. In 2009, he took the helm of this fire department. He only had about 20 firefighters to start with. Since that time, he's grown this fire department to an all-career paid department with over 140 members. During this time of his tenure, he has built 6 fire stations and created a state-of-the-art fire department. I'm very proud of the accomplishment that I've been a part of, that he's helped us to grow here. With that being said, Chief Robert Hudson.
Good morning. My voice is not always a great one for a microphone. I've got a certain intonation level that makes it tough, and I'm not a fan of microphones, but hopefully you can hear me in the back. Thank you for coming today. This is a momentous occasion. We stand here this morning remembering an awful event that occurred 20 years ago. I'm very fortunate that I was able to respond to the World Trade Center. I was in Michigan at the time, and I was a chief officer in the public safety department in the Detroit metropolitan area. My morning started very uneventfully. I was at Michigan State University in East Lansing, Michigan, getting ready to go through some fire inspector continuing education with about 200 other fire inspectors from across the state. And just before the educational programs began, the president of the association came out and said, "We received reports that an aircraft had struck one of the World Trade Center towers." You know, obviously a bunch of firefighters get together, they start speculating what the cause was, and most of us at that point thought, man, how does that happen? And most of us also thought, well, maybe it was a student pilot or something in a small aircraft, veered off course and something bad happened. About 15 minutes later, they come back out and say, well, we have a report that the other World Trade Center tower has been struck. Well, you didn't have to put 2 and 2 together to realize that it was intentional, and it was a terrorist act. So back in the day, in 2001, we didn't have the technology that we all carry a smartphone, and we could immediately get messages and news media and all that. So the state-of-the-art time was a digital pager. And so all the digital pagers that we all wore started beeping or vibrating, and we were all being called back to our respective jurisdictions for whatever we were going to face later that day. So to cut my story short, an hour and a half later, my city manager and my mayor and my boss is telling me that we're going to New York. Because we were a public safety department, which is a combination police and fire, that we all were both police officers and firefighters. And so we had just developed a confined space rescue team just a few months prior. And the New Jersey, New York Port Authority had sent a lean message, a law enforcement information network message across the country, asking for assistance. So me being the kind of pragmatic guy that I am, I said, Chief, I'm not sure that we need to drive 600 miles. I'm sure there's all kinds of resources available between us and New York. But they decided we were going to go, and if we got there and weren't of need, then just come back home. So we assembled with a group of other firefighters from the Lansing area, who ironically, I have 4 of us, myself and 3 other firefighters in this department that were at Ground Zero. And I had hoped to have them all here today. 2 of them are currently with Texas Strike Team 123 in Houma, Louisiana, ending the 2nd week of response there. So Battalion Chief Mike Johnson went to World Trade Center with me. Lieutenant Adam Moore went to the World Trade Center with me. And Battalion Chief Steve Sparks was part of it from Texas Task Force 1, because Battalion Chief Sparks was a charter member when the team first began, and still is a member today. So I ended up with all those folks in New York, and our team from Michigan, who worked together on the pile for 4 days, returning later in the week. In fact, we left the morning that President Bush spoke at the Ground Zero site. Basically, it was a time of exhilaration, pride, terror, lots of stories, lots of pictures. I was asked by my church to talk this morning already to our monthly men's breakfast, and that brought back a whole bunch of emotions. In fact, getting ready this morning, I had the TV on as I was preparing, and today's show had the dog handler handling Brittany from Texas Task Force 1 talking about her activities there, and she broke down talking. It kind of got me stirred up, and I apologize for that. But it is an emotional thing to talk about. I'm very proud that myself and several members of our department got the opportunity to work there. Very proud of that. And one of the things that we said that we would never forget, 20 years later, unfortunately I see that we often only remember a couple of days before and a couple of days after. And the other thing that we need to remember is that we lost a lot of lives that day, as Chief Huffman reflected on. But we're losing people every day from the chronic illness that they, when you stood there for days or weeks, as some of the New York firefighters did, there was a fine gray dust covering everything. And when you stepped, a little puff of it came by. If a vehicle came by, there was a cloud. And to make a little light of it, if you ever remember the Peanuts character Pigpen, that's kind of what it was like, that every time you walked, there was this cloud of dust. And unfortunately, that was made up of all kinds of things that we all inhaled over that time. It's a blessing. I'm still healthy, and most of our guys are, but we still lose firefighters, police officers, EMS people that were at that site every day. And I don't want to forget that. We've had challenges in the federal government to get funding for that ongoing health care. And it's been more work than it should have been to take care of those that took care of us back 20 years ago. So that's as political as I'll get. Once again, thank you for being here. I have a lot of dignitaries here today. I would love to name them all, but I know that I would miss somebody. So I'm going to use that as a disclaimer. But Congressman Brady and Representative Toth are here, and I'm very pleased that they're here. I know we have law enforcement from around the county, we have city officials from Oak Ridge, and I truly appreciate all of your interest, and never forget. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it was Thomas Paine that said, the tree of liberty from time to time must be refreshed by the blood of patriots. And guys, I've never been firsthand witness on the battlefield, but we've witnessed, all of us have witnessed you guys. Every time we drive down this road or in front of a firehouse when the siren goes and you guys go out there make the sacrifice for us. We love you. We appreciate you guys so much. And 9/11 will stand as a permanent tribute to you guys and the sacrifice that you make for us every day, the same way that Pearl Harbor did on December 7th, 1941. And I just echo what you just said, that so many of us have forgotten the incredible sacrifice on 9/11 and the sacrifice that you guys make for us every day. We're so appreciative of you, for you, and the 343 lives from FDNY. God bless you.
Our next speaker to address you today will be Congressman Kevin Brady. Kevin Brady is a pro-family, pro-small business conservative who proudly represents the 8th Congressional District of Texas. Congressman Brady has represented Texas for the last 24 years. I would like to thank Congressman Brady for his loyal and dedicated service to the United States in representing the great state of Texas. I'd also like to congratulate Congressman Brady on his upcoming retirement in this next coming year. Your leadership in this community and in this state will be greatly missed. Thank you on behalf of the South Montgomery County for speaking with us today. Please welcome Congressman Brady.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for your service, especially today. Thank you, Chief, for 45 years of public service to our community and others. Your leadership has been incredible, and I am honored to stand here with you and our other firefighters and emergency personnel and law enforcement on this important day. I do too want to thank President Kelly and the entire Emergency Services District Board. These things don't happen by themselves, and these commissioners spend an incredible amount of time making sure we're providing as a community the support, the facilities, the training, everything to protect us. And so to President Kelly and to the board, thank you for all that you do day in and day out. And thank you again to all of our firefighters, emergency personnel. Chief, thank you for recognizing those who joined you at Ground Zero who couldn't be with us today. I want to join you in recognizing Battalion Chief Johnson, Battalion Chief Sparks, and Lieutenant Moore for their work at Ground Zero that day. Representative Toth, thank you as well for being here, your service, and also your support of our public safety officers. On this 20th anniversary of the terrible attacks of 9/11, I pray three things for America. First, that we never let our guard down against the evil and unrelenting enemy, a fanatic enemy that continues as we meet today, continues to plot the death and destruction of our nation, of our families, and our way of life. Secondly, that we never forget the innocent lives lost on that day 20 years ago, nor the heroism of our first responders and the everyday Americans who brought Flight 93's terrorist mission to an end. And joining them in our hearts are the brave men and women of our military who've served and sacrificed their years, their lives, and their dreams to keep us safe in the years since. And third, that every parent commits to ensuring our children and grandchildren understand the horror, the heroism, and the resilience of a nation that refused to be brought to its knees, a nation that responded, if you recall, with flags flying, churches overflowing, and a determination to never again take our freedoms for granted. In the years since the attack, over 70 million Americans have been born. 70 million Americans, young people to whom that terrible day is not a memory, it's just history. As Americans, we have to make sure that 9/11 never becomes merely a distant historical event, but a continued call to action to preserve a nation whose values of liberty and freedom are granted from God and must be preserved for generations of Americans to come. Like you, I won't forget that day because I can't forget that day. A shocking, heartbreaking, horrific day, the deadliest attack on American soil in our history. Those horrible images will never fade from our memory. But neither should the images of how we came together in an automatic, inspiring embrace of unity and patriotism. We all know where we were. I'll always remember not just that day, but that evening, after a stunned Congress gathered on the steps of the Capitol to sing God Bless America. Together, I and a few of my colleagues walked around to the west steps of the Capitol. And as the smoke of the burning Pentagon rose above the National Mall, while surrounding city streets stood eerily quiet, devoid of cars, of people, of planes, not a sound. We sat in silence and prayed as the sun set on a stunningly clear blue fall day, just like today. We asked God to wrap his arms around this nation, the victims and the heroes we lost, and their loved ones. It's a moment I'll never forget, and a prayer I'll never stop giving. It's the same prayer I said viewing the Pentagon destruction a few days later, and at the still burning Ground Zero in New York in support of Texas Task Force 1, our renowned emergency response team from Texas A&M. I represented Texas A&M at the time. I had worked to secure federal funding for Disaster City, so I felt like this was our Texas Task Force 1. And I prayed it again outside the Javits Center in New York, where our first responders were staged. And as we walked by wooden signboard after wooden signboard, crammed with handmade pieces of paper showing photos of missing husbands, missing wives, missing children and friends, all asking a simple question: have you seen? It was heartbreaking. We couldn't know this then, but now, 20 years later, this war to protect our homeland isn't over. Not by our choice. The same terrorist Taliban in Afghanistan who harbored bin Laden and Al-Qaeda as they plotted and trained this deadly attack now have a country of their own. A country where for 2 decades, out of necessity, America, our allies, and yes, Afghanis, fought side by side to defeat terrorism where it lives rather than letting it attack us where we live. Today, though, is not a day for that. It's not a day to celebrate. It's a day to honor and to memorialize the heroes we lost on September 11th in New York, at the Pentagon, and on the Pennsylvania field. The heroes who have fought terrorism on foreign soil and succeeded in keeping us safe here in America the past 2 decades. 46 of whom, from the 8th Congressional District of Texas, never returned home alive to their loved ones. And just recently, the 13 of our country's dedicated military men and women whose lives were taken at the Kabul airport as they fought to evacuate Americans and our allies. All of these heroes, 20 years worth, stand connected in one remarkable, immortal line. On 9/11, we lost 343 firefighters from 75 different station houses, perhaps just like this, throughout New York. 78 police officers at Ground Zero and another on United Flight 93. We lost 55 military men and women at the Pentagon, and in those years since, we've lost hundreds of our emergency responders who raced to Ground Zero and fight those health conditions that still exist today. When we look at those we lost on 9/11, those emergency responders, their ages, they ranged from 22 up to 71 years old. 22 to 71, everyday Americans from 3 different generations, bound forever by their heroism. But who they are and what they did that day lives far beyond them. Look closely at those killed at Kabul. Their average age is 22. Think about it, just children as the Twin Towers collapsed. And one of them Marine Lance Corporal David Espinoza from Laredo, who was only 20 years old, born the very year our nation was attacked. And while they seem 2 decades apart, I can't help but believe the bravery of our first responders on September 11th inspired them and a whole generation of Americans to stand where duty required them to stand. We can all take pride knowing that the heroes we witnessed that day live on in the American heroes who serve us this day, in our fire stations, in our law enforcement centers, and at military posts throughout the world. So, what kind of nation deserves such men and women? The answer is a nation graced by God, the greatest nation on earth. But we earn such devotion only as long as we honor their sacrifice, as we instill their values in our children and grandchildren, and we commit ourselves to do whatever it takes to protect and preserve our freedoms. We are so truly blessed. And on this 20th year together, let's recommit ourselves to remaining that nation of courage and of character. It's a nation that inspires generations that follow. And I hope you feel as I do that we're up to the challenge. We are, because we have to be. God bless all those who lost their lives, all those who have followed, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
That concludes the indoor portion of our ceremony today. I would like to ask that all uniformed personnel dismiss and reassemble in file along the sidewalk in the front of the building, making 2 lines down one side, down each side of the sidewalk. I would ask that our guests please assemble right behind the apparatus here, just outside the bay doors. On your way out, if you did not receive a challenge coin, please grab a challenge coin for your family. Just to make sure that everyone gets one, just please take one per family. Uniformed personnel dismissed. Will our guests please dismiss after we've assembled, please? Thank you.